a point at which a function can be even undefined. Here, actually, I was talking about my various trends in supply chain across sectors. And then I think one good starting point is what are the expectations of chief executives from a supply chain? So obviously, the obvious things are there, cost reduction. But then the other thing is value beyond cost, which is the current future trend in supply chain. So supply chain is not just functional. What is the other values it can add to the business? Then we talk about value of realization in order of importance, cost reduction projects, risk management projects, value optimization projects, sustainability projects, and innovation and growth projects. So this was a survey done by Kearney, and in this order is how the CEOs have rated the supply chain requirements. So this applies under normal conditions as well as during the discontinuities. So to drive my point home, I decided to go for manufacture and distribution of low-cost detergent cake. Obviously, I had some years of experience, so I have some insight in that. But why this product I took for illustration is this product is very close to nature, and though it's simple, in its simplicity, it does not forgive shortcuts either in manufacturing, sourcing, and also not being sensitive to the weather conditions, handling, packing, everything. Second thing is it's a undifferentiated low-cost product. So almost there's nothing but the product itself has to be on the shelf of the retailer. So that means your supply chain end-to-end has to be perfect. There is always certain amount of recycling to be done when you extrude the detergent bar, and there's a limited quantity only which you can recirculate. So again, the margin for quality variation and manufacturing process errors are less. Any mistake will reflect in the cost, either in supply chain or processing. So again, because the low cost product, it throws up its own unique challenges. So any solution by itself has to be extremely efficient, expedient, as well as low cost. Other thing is the variation of the input quality, which because a lot of the material is mined, so and it comes from different geographies under different weathers. So again, the issue there is not having a very consistent and predictable quality in inputs, but still your output has to be standard. Other learning here is both manufacturing and automation levels are scalable. So you can do it, you can make a detergent bar on a tabletop machine, and you can go all the way manufacturing tens of thousands of tons per annum. Here, there's no getting away from technology to understand it. So I think I'll take you a bit through what a detergent cake formulation typically could be, and especially low cost detergent. So if you see the active matter in a low price bar is only 12 to 15%. So that also plays a part in cost reduction. The other noticeable thing is you have a higher amount of binders and clay. And clay availability is cheap but seasonal. Salt, again, is not an issue, is abundant and inexpensive. Also, water content is high. So all these factors go towards making it a low price bar. Just to give some idea of a plant. So if you can follow my mouse cursor, so you have a bucket elevator where the sacks of the mined material are brought. They are lifted to what is called a Sigma mixer, which is basically a mixer having twin wound drive, which ensures more uniform mixing. Then it goes to a noodler or extruder, as you may know, which gives the profile of the bar in a one continuous, it's like a continuous bar, which gets extruded. And then you have a vacuum plodder and a bar cutter, which cuts the bar into the required detergent cake size. And then you have a conveyor, then a stamping machine where the brand name is printed. And then there's a wrapping machine. And all the wrapped bars are then put into cartons using an auto case packer. So we start here at the top end with a batch process. Typically, if you are making something like 30,000 tons per annum, just to give you an idea, and 3 shifts running, the batch mixing time is every 12 minutes you have to mix a batch. So that is the high amount of frequency. And every batch mixing, there are, as you saw, there are 20 components, and every batch has a different quality. So batch mixing is also a very intricate and a highly observant and skillful job. Now we'll look at this challenge of environmental discontinuity from 2 points of view. So one is the seasonality and the mining part and geographical part, and other is something to do with availability of labor. So if you, I have just taken some statistics from ML directory. So as you see here, the percentage of area. So if you see, the biggest mining states are Odisha, Karnataka, MP, and Maharashtra to some extent, and again Chhattisgarh and Gujarat are also fairly high. Now, contrary to popular belief that mining causes deforestation, all that, this is as on 2015. This is the period I am discussing. If you see, mining lease area only contributes to 0.1% of the total land. So there's enormous potential, and that much of deforestation actually has not happened at that time. Now we come to some challenges which are related to monsoon season and mining. Now, biggest challenge in manufacturing of a low-cost bar is actually the moisture, because if you have too much moisture, the bar in its transit to the customer will get misshaped. And if there's too little, it becomes brittle and it will break. And the more water absorption is there in the content, where the most of the formulation is hygroscopic, the drying time is also a limitation. Now, if you look at mined minerals, which are the destinations from there, where they are coming. So if you see dry powders, these are the locations. Calcium clay comes from Kerala, Tamil Nadu borders. Lapsa comes from various plants which are more towards central and central western India. So again, these are the monsoon cycle. The monsoon progresses from southeast all the way to northwest. And typical monsoon, unless it's delayed, will last from June to September. 90% of precipitation happens in July, August. And these are the indications that when the monsoon starts, from where the supply chain rupture starts. So if you go from south, for example, the early monsoons will delay your China clay or calcium clay supplies. And as you go further, your Lapsa supplies will be affected, not because plants stop working, but because of availability of tankers, and the tankers which are more prone to overturning and those kinds of situations. So you run short of tankers in monsoon season. As you go to mined minerals, the monsoon hits there last. But while the supplies from Rajasthan and Gujarat areas can continue to the rest of India, for them to come down south sometimes becomes a challenge. So this is to show where the active ingredient plants are. So here we can see. Now this is the picture which is very relevant today, because this is the current status as during lockdown. So here if you see, barring some of the plants again in the western region, most of the plants are temporarily closed. So that is another challenge which is there. Again, we come to the withdrawal of monsoons. Again, the dates here start from northwest going all the way to southeast. And here the cycle operates in reverse. And from September onwards, while the monsoon stop, the supplies resume from those states almost after 2 or 3 weeks, because the soil is still wet. So if you see the total duration, that if the peak monsoon lasts for, let's say, 3.5 months, the impact of supply chain is almost for 4.5 months, typically. So this is a summary of what we discussed now. And here, again, the challenges for supply and manufacturers, then you start stockpiling your materials. So you stockpile in advance, much in advance before the monsoon starts. For China clay, let's say, you stock it for 3.5 months. And then when you go to minerals, towards the end of the monsoon, or sorry, towards the beginning of the monsoon, again, there, after a delay of say 1 month from the China clay stoppage, that part is got a phase shift of 1 to 1.5 months, and there you start again stocking for 3 to 3.5 months. And because LABSA is in short supply, most plants are forced to create their own LABSA tanks, and that storage again has to take care of at least 1 to 1.5 months. The other typical challenges, which are very paradoxical, but the thing is, you know, some of the minerals are hygroscopic and they absorb moisture. So when you make your mix in the mixer, then you have to make sure you add less water, not more. So detergent manufacturing by itself is an exothermic reaction. We are talking of these detergents where the soda ash acts with LABSA, and there is some emission of fumes, and also some moisture also in the process is lost, but that is to the extent of 1 to 2% only. Now we come to the other aspect of discontinuity, which is labor availability. So labor availability for the plants, typically these plants get their labor either from real estate or the daily wage workers, or they come from agricultural backgrounds. So in the harvest season, most of these laborers are just not available, because the male labor are called for to harvest the farms and also take it to the market. So then there's a period of 2 months after, starting every harvest season, when these labor are just not available. So you have a labor issue apart from the monsoon challenge. The other issue is not question of labor availability, but that of labor participation. Now, if you look at the male participation till 2011 and 12, the figures have more or less remained constant. The situation is not very different today, basically because the labor force has also upgraded their skills and moved to a salaried kind of a class. The other aspect which was relevant in those times is the highly skilled workers which get trained in the plants. They are one of the first to leave and typically take overseas jobs for better salaries in OECD and GCC countries. So I'll just share some, we'll quickly go through some statistics, but this shows the extent of immigration and how it has increased over the years. So again, when we are looking at state-wise plants, we can look at, let's say, figures in 2012. So if you see, 25% of labor is from UP, which has migrated, and 12% is from AP, 11% from Bihar. So such kind of statistics come. There's some work done by Johansson and Olavarria, which I'm sharing with you, which shows how between 2010 to 2016, the skilled manufacturing workforce will change. So if you see, the component is gone up from 7% to 13%, and the services component has gone up by 6%. The other part which used to happen, I was trying to locate sources after 2001, which I could not, but there are some definite trends and patterns in internal migration. And if you see, then the arrows indicate where the migrations have taken place. Again, these are cases of construction workers, infrastructure workers, and agriculturists who migrate to the other state, and again in the holidays or the harvest seasons, they return to their native state. Uh, Again, some of this labor is also related to mining because the detergent plants as well as the mining areas are not too far from each other. So if you see evolution of metal consumption, in India, the progression is slow as compared to China, which is really meeting the world demand. The other worry, again, for India or Asia, I would say, rest of Europe and Asia is the Southeast Asia, especially the loss of GDP due to impact of climatic change. And some of this climatic change may have to do with mining too. Now we'll come to the aspect of differentiating between supply chain resiliency and supply chain okay, let's do the resiliency part first. So supply chain resiliency means ability to manage risk and be best positioned to respond and even gain advantage from disruptions. So here we are talking of both in terms of resilience as well as some state of adaptive configuration. But there is a school of thought saying that in times of discontinuity, especially environmental disasters, which are cause the discontinuity, resilience is equivalent of putting concrete around trees and steel poles in their trunks to make sure they don't break before the hurricane. So not only it is ineffective or it's expensive, it does not serve the purpose because the supply chain becomes resilient, but it doesn't give you the results. So supply chain management rates for environmental discontinuities, what is required? Of course, one of the things which are much talked about is sustained leadership and governance. So leadership in times of crisis, for example, that is the most important thing which has been listed. Other thing is the doing an exhaustive checklist of risks and planning for the risk ahead, and also addressing the what if kind of conditions in case the risk hits you. Criticality assessment of associators and suppliers for each risk. So we need to do not only the capacity assessment, but also the capability assessment for each of the associates and suppliers to manage the risk. Then testing agile responses, which basically is more about saying that in event of emergency, what is the kind of response or action or delivery you can expect the different segments of supply chain. Finally, we talk about enterprise function risk matrix, which is the business critical functions, and which could be more in terms of the following the doing the invoicing, making sure the statutory requirements are met, also something on health and safety, and then potential action plans have to be developed ahead for each risk scenario. So we are talking about 100% checklisting and a potential action plan for each risk. And this works you towards 100% supply chain immunity as opposed to resilience. So one parallel vision of supply chain could be that of a human body which is acquiring immunity and resisting the invaders. So it is always there from birth, but then the system has to recognize the invader, has to go into action immediately, and the active cells have to surround and engulf the invader and kill him. So in an active supply chain, in this case, here we are talking about also recognition, immediate action, and annulling the risk or working around the risk. So again, what does immunization do? we train the immune system to make antibodies to protect oneself. So environmental discontinuity also pushes the need for supply chains for demand sensing capabilities, having people who turn into crisis managers and then fight the new situation. So there are some three principal thoughts I came across, so which I thought I'd share with the audience, and they are supply chain governance for supply response, contingency response, orbital regime for market intelligence to understand shifting conditions, and prioritization of relief efforts based on an intelligence and agile response. So I'm trying to put each of these points and apply it to our case, which we are discussing. So when we take the case of detergent, then we are talking about multiple and distributed manufacturing locations. In this case, because it's a medium to large kind of an enterprise, and here the bulk of the material as compared to the cost of the material, the bulk is quite high. So it makes sense to have a distributed manufacturing to reduce cost on transport. Other thing is about multiple mine sources, because in this scenario, when we are talking about this kind of formulation, the mine capacity is limited in the sense that the production, I would rather say the mine production, actual production capacity is limited. It is sometimes something to do with labor, something to do with over exploitation of mine, which causes flooding. And the mines, these are open cast mines and they can't be used sometimes for 3-4 years. So all those factors contribute to this. And you have retail sales stockists, which earlier were set up because of arbitrary reasons just on the outskirts of the cities or major consumption centers. And then you have retailers distributed throughout the consumption center. So this is a scenario we are looking. And here we are looking at how we solve this problem. So supply chain, contingency governance is one is we come to the labor part where we ensure retention of labor through family welfare and support measures of labor. This is something we actually tried, where we use the male labor for the labor part, and we use the women of the family for, let's say, something like gardening around the plant or housekeeping. So they are actively employed. And we even planned a creche for their children. So those kinds of facilities are required if you want to retain the labor. And also, while on work, we have to provide them refreshments and of good quality, and that also is a very important factor in retaining the labor. Then managing the supply chain of labor. Now, in our case, is very important because it's like a continuous process chain. Sometimes your manufacturing of a low cost bar itself is a supply chain. So everything is continuous. And therefore, what happens is your productivity or your production levels are totally dependent on the amount of labor who report for the shift every day in the factory. So the supply chain has got inputs, which is labor and materials and machines, which have to go hand in hand. Any imbalance causes the excess of inventory or resources on the other input. Other part is here continuous job rotation and multi-skilling, because like I said, the highly skilled workers are the ones more prone to turnover. And because of that, they have to be rotated. The newer workers have to be trained, their skill building, capability building, flexibility, multitasking, all those aspects, they have to be trained in and they have to be taken to the next level. Transport here becomes a lifeline, because if you imagine a factory which has got materials coming in and is produced, almost 50 tons a day kind of a output, and if the trucks do not report, then you have an issue that you have no factory space, and these are not the goods which can be kept in an unsecure open environment. So that becomes another challenge. You can't have too many of the trucks reporting at the same time. At the same time, you can't have none reporting for several hours. So there has to be continuous flow of transport itself. So there's always a person who does environmental scanning and goes into the markets and continuously is negotiating the timings, rates, and ensures that trucks keep reporting on a regular frequency. The other thing is to make your trucks and tankers captive, especially the trucks where you use the truck for bringing in the supplies, have him wait, load the finished goods, and also send him to a retail sales stockist where you want the marketing wants the materials to go. And from there, you ensure that he again goes back to the supply point, which is the mines. So that ensures that in the closed loop, the truck is always available to you throughout, and it doesn't leave the loop and go across to some other sector or go to your competitors. The other aspect is orbital regime for market to understand shifting conditions. So here, when we say orbital regime, I mean, this is something like a satellite orbiting the Earth. So it has got an apogee and a perigee. When it comes closer, it takes a closer scan. When it's farther, it takes a broad scan. So that kind of scanning is required on the marketing intelligence supply side also. And at the time when we did not have GPS on trucks, and even if it's there, the truck drivers are often in the habit of disconnecting them. So then you have a system of what is called dhaba intelligence, where they take the stops, and then you have the dhaba owner. Actually, you pick up information from him, which truck reported when, because they know the drivers by first names, and they know when he came, when he left, and also the estimate on the speed of the truck. All these things are possible. Other part is the estimating shortfall in supplies and availability of transport in monsoon and harvest season. So that what I mentioned earlier, to stockpile in advance and not to forget your packaging materials and HDPE sacks too. So again, there's a demand side market intelligence. So here, something which we have practiced, which is called demarketing, which includes at the time when there's not so much of digital marketing, or even now it's relevant. If the retailer's shelf space is totally occupied by your material and not the competitor's material, the competitor actually cannot run his events or marketing campaign. So the product presence at the retail point is a very important thing. So this is where the supply chain plays a very crucial role in this kind of a production, where the product is undifferentiated. If you don't have stock at retail point, the customer loyalties are very fragile and he will shift to the other competitor's product. We also brought in to take care of something about last mile movement. We also ensured that RSS had a service line agreement where they were paid on the storage capacity. So when they have low stock of the finished goods, we convince them to store some of the raw materials. So these also, RSS stock points also became our, inventory in times of crisis. The monsoon inventory, everything could be stored at the RSS points. Now we come to the other point, which is the relief efforts prioritization based on intelligence and agile. So here we did a typically new thing. Normally the tendency is for a factory or manufacturer to outsource some components of its production. Here we did an insourcing, because typically the mines are in more remote areas and they have more difficult working conditions. The labor is also not better paid. And under these conditions, the shortage of laborers in mines, in these kinds of environmental dislocation is more. So those are the periods we said, okay, we have a surplus of labor who are wanting to join. And then we shifted, some activities like vibratory sieves or the mine minerals. And this is very particularly relevant because in the monsoon season, some of the minerals crystallize and become more like a rock. And those have to be broken, ground, and then sifted through the vibratory sieves. So we brought it to the factory, and the cost was charged off to the supplier. So there was no, everybody, it was a win-win situation for everybody. other thing in monsoon and critical season is when you are expecting a disruption, or the supplier is giving the competitors more supply priority as compared to you. And that those are the periods you renegotiate the SLAs with the vendor and have a penalty clause for short supplies and transfer the transport responsibility to the vendor. Because this is important, because the lack of transport is often cited as the reason for failing in supplies. And in terms of labor shortage, we planned for, there are some sectors which have lean seasons when this sector is having a peak season. So we also got into the habit of borrowing labor from other projects. And when we had a lean season, we could also allow our labor to join them on a temporary basis. So most of these things we have discussed, but the last point is about, there's a survey done across mines about 4 years back, and the results are what happens in the mine, what are the priorities for the mines. And in that order is renegotiating with contractors at mines to provide service to mine on better rates, business process automation. Now that is one area which most mines, especially in India, are totally lacking. And that's why they become reliant on manual labor. And also automation in the mines as well as process automation to reduce the back office staff, where there's a high turnover of the educated staff. In case of mines, most mines went through the experience that they are better off delaying and suspending projects where the cost benefit analysis was not very clear. So if in doubt, don't do. So that is the one rule which most mines felt paid off. Selling off underperforming assets, implementing continuous improvement program, whether it's in terms of productivity or quality, improving equipment utilization, reducing cycle times. So these are the focus as the mines progress in their lives. Now we come to scheduling. While this slide is more on manufacturing, but you can read it as scheduling as it applies to the vendors who supply the mine material to the factories. So the typical time-honored classical approaches is reactive, it's post-event, and it has a periodic demand assessment. So you have, for example, 1 week's demand followed by 2 weeks tentative schedule, and which keeps getting updated every week. So it's like a rolling kind of a forecast on which the vendor operates and tries to deliver material. The more modern or current practice seems to be that accounts for disruptions, let's say in terms of machine breakdown and due date changes, which you'll see on the right here. And how to build it, how to reschedule material, and how to make sure that the rescheduling incorporates these unforeseen breakdowns. And this rescheduling of the vendor has to be shared with the customer, which is a plant. So unless it's shared, unless the exchange happen, the plant cannot understand what are the gaps coming and plan for alternate sourcing to cover those gaps. The last portion we come is the observation about, again, it's a study done by Ernst & Young, which talks about which are the factors which have high, medium, and low impact, and how these factors progress. For example, this is the first year, second year, and further. So supply chain reset. This happens in first year. So where you start the mine and then you decide where all the supplies need to go. And you also look at the cost of transport and distances. Then the next one having medium impact is reduced manpower. The one having high impact is rebalance capital. So obviously the plant and machinery turnover, management of capital in mine requires a very significant portion in the second year. going further, the human tech interface, as you go more towards automation and business process automation, that becomes important. Again, from the point of view of reclamation and reconstruction of the mine, to prolong the mine's active work life cycle, you do a redevelopment of a mine plan before finally closing the mine. So we'll stop here and I'll take questions. And I'm telling beforehand that any questions which I'm not able to take in this session can be addressed to me on the email, and definitely I would respond to them. Where do you see the hands?
Nobody has.
Scroll down here, we'll see. It takes time. Want to type something?
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, good afternoon, sir. This is Gurpreet, the MS ex Ramaya student,
Yeah.
1618 batch. Sir, your session was actually a thoughtful one. Even I was one of the operations student only. Sir, I want to ask that what could be some of the reasons or aspects or challenges which could limit the effort which is put in by supply chain to improve the sustainability?
Okay. Fine. I think I purposely kept the practical side and speaking more out of experience. And I didn't go that much into theory for very different reasons. So I think something we would have glimpsed from the seminar is, if we don't understand the nature and sensitivity of the product to the environment, so that could get into the way of a supply chain. So the supply chain efforts, while I appreciate AI has come into a big way, algorithms are there. But what happens is, in quality, you do a FMEA, you establish a cause effect relationship. So a supply chain manager would always feel uncomfortable if he cannot see how the supply chain is actually moving. So the visibility part, which can be through a animated simulation maybe. And I mean, if you're able to see how all your trucks are moving, this is something we have actually done. If you know how your trucks are moving all over the landscape on a map, for example. So that could be a very useful kind of a thing before you actually apply AI. Have I answered your question? I mean, that's what you wanted?
Completely, because I wanted to ask that what limit they are putting to put in the effort. So just in order to improve the sustainability, like you can take for COVID-19 only, so many supply chain had come to a halt. They weren't able to reach to the destination and supply their products from where completely it was like a lockdown in their procedure as well. So what could be the effort, or what could be some of the challenges which they are, they could limit the effort which is put in by the supply chain?
Oh, challenge. I think challenges are very obvious, but the challenges should not stop a person. That's what this webinar is about. In fact, for example, if you want to restart your plant, so can you tell me, Gurpreet, where from you'll start the plant? You'll start from the supplier end, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, unless your supplies come, you can't restart. The other aspect could be, for example, if your power lines are down, then the factory needs electric power. So these could be the initial most important starting points. So here, because it's your need to run the plant, you cannot be waiting for supplier to start getting his labor, start his plant, and ramp up the production. This is something you have to go beyond the boundaries defined, and if required, you'll have to support him from the outside. You'll have to maybe arrange labor for him. So these are the limits. I think if you start seeing the limits, then the work doesn't progress.
So how do you think that these limits can improve the sustainability of the supply chain?
Yeah, it's not just sustainable. First, you have to start to become sustainable. I'm talking about starting after a discontinuity. You have to go out of the way to help your suppliers. Maybe you have to tell them where to find labor, or even share some of your labor with you. Help them getting their transport. Help them to get their raw materials. Even vendor has a raw material, right? So you need to understand what difficulties is facing. So I think it's an event like, you go beyond the boundary and jump into his game. So first get his factory going so that your factory can start going.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Slow.